Okay, it's live.
Awesome.
All right, welcome everyone. We're doing this a little bit different this month. We had some technical difficulties, so we're recording this, and it'll be posted to YouTube. But tonight's guest is Mr. Jason Haley from Boston, Massachusetts. He's going to be our speaker for the Memphis Azure User Group this month, which is going to be on Thursday, May 2nd at 6 p.m. Jason, thank you for joining me this evening.
Thanks for having me.
So, you are kind of a historic first for the Memphis Azure user group. You are actually going to be our first in-person speaker. The meetings that we've
Awesome.
done up to now have been hybrid, not hybrid. I'm sorry, virtual. This one will be hybrid. I'll post as soon as I get the Teams link from Microsoft. I'll post it to Meetup. But the reason why you're in person is because we have a unique opportunity that you're just going to be passing through Memphis. So, would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm traveling in the area. I have a race on the opposite side of Tennessee, but I have some family that's not too far from Memphis in Mitchie, I think is Mitchie, Tennessee.
Mhm.
And they just, my stepbrother just recently bought a ranch out there, and I wanted to stop visit him on the way to War Trace, Tennessee, I think it's called. I don't know if
I've
that's how
heard
it's
of that, yeah.
pronounced. Yes, so there's a 40-mile race called Strolling Jim, this Saturday. So since I often try to pair talks with my travels, I reached out to you to see if you'd be available, or if your group would be interested in a topic. I know sometimes it doesn't fall on the pattern. Whenever I travel, it's like, well, we often meet in the end of the month, and I'm traveling in the beginning of the month. But I'm glad it's going to work out. Glad we do in person
Yeah.
versus virtual. We've only done a handful of virtuals with our group, so I help with the what was virtual Boston Azure for the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, I had my own user group north of Boston in a town called Burlington. But there's also a Boston Azure user group. We have enough, or we pre-pandemic we had enough interest for two groups around here. But
Mm,
since the pandemic, it's not really enough for two groups. The We found that the commute in the outer outskirts of the city where mine was is too sporadic. So people often go into work on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they don't necessarily want to go to something after before they go
yeah.
home. So we've stopped doing that one, and we've just been doing the one downtown, which it's not really downtown Boston, it's in Cambridge, so it's across the river
Right.
technically. It's not Boston, but it's easy to get to by the train. There's a lot of people that do live in the area. We have found that the AI topics have been the most popular.
Mhm.
Our typical Azure talk, which was security on app services, we did that last year, and we got maybe a dozen people show up. Where when we do an AI talk, we have 30 to 40 people show up.
Wow.
And that was about what we usually had for a pre-pandemic talk was 30, yeah, I'd say between 30 and 40 for a very hot topic, or a good speaker. We'd have maybe up to 60.
Wow.
We rarely went above that. It's just weird. I mean, certain topics, you just get people that you've never seen before show up to your group, and then you never see them again. And we always kind of had that group where we had at least a dozen core members that were always coming and going. But the pandemic kind of changed everything. We have started to get a small subset of a core group again, but it's small. It's like maybe six people, not even a
Mhm.
dozen people that will be there no matter what the topic is,
Right.
or most of the time, whether the topic's interested or not. But virtual, the virtual kind of removes the whole social and networking aspect out
Mhm.
of the meeting. And so people go to learn. And if they're not interested in the topic, they don't go.
Right.
So also, if you record it, we found that that kind of again splits. Like, okay, well, I don't
Yeah.
have time to do it, so I won't make it tonight. Where if it's only offered live, you do get a better turnout. But I mean, it's really the purpose of what you want to do. We've tried to I hate to say it, but we've kind of gone to just in person and not done even the hybrid or the recording, just so that we get a better turnout and a more engaged audience when we're there. We have still been trying to do one virtual a month. We were unfortunate with January and February. We had cancellations to the last minute, which is another thing with virtual. It can be canceled at the last minute, and
True.
food didn't get canceled. People aren't en route to the event, so it's not a bad thing for most people, but it does tend to make it so that it's less regular. So you're going to get less regular people there if it's not always that third Thursday of the month or whatever. If it's not on their mind, if that's usually the week that they go, then it's one less reason for them to just attend it. They'll look up and see if the topic is interesting or not, and then maybe they'll watch the recording. So the YouTube channel has got more volume while we actually have less people show up for the talk. So it's been all over the place. The pandemic really has changed user groups for
Yeah,
us.
it has.
Yeah.
Here too, yeah.
So it's kind of weird.
Yeah. You mentioned recordings, recording the, virtual groups. The problem that I've had is that, if I'm recording the meeting, it's not necessarily that I have fewer people show up, it's the people that show up are less likely to participate because they don't wanna be on the recording.
Uh,
So, that's one of the things I've been actually experimenting with is being very explicit. I'm not recording this, so to get because I've been doing what I've been working on with
yeah.
some workshops lately, and, trying to get people to, if you I don't know
Yeah.
if you've ever tried to do a workshop virtually, it's like you're talking to yourself for a whole lot of time, so
We tried to after our last talk. So the funny thing is, so I'm presenting retrieval augmented generation or RAG.
right.
Um, but our last talk, we had a presenter from the West Coast present that. Sometimes I don't present at my own group. The But she was a really really good presenter, and it was a very interactive talk. And we tried to do a short hands-on lab afterwards.
Mhm.
And a few people, we had, I forget, I don't think I tracked it either. We had around 30 people, which is really high for
Nice.
our virtual attendance lately. And they were very interactive. They had a lot of good questions. They were definitely paying attention to the talk, and they were wanting to talk instead of just chat messages. Oftentimes you'll get people that ask questions, but they'll just chat messages. They don't want to actually participate so
Yeah.
much. And whatever. I mean, ask a question whether you chat or over voice is great, but it really kind of shows another level of engagement whenever they're um, really interacting with the person as the presentation's going on. And the I think it dropped down to around 10 or a dozen people afterwards that were also doing the very simple beginner level um, OpenAI
Mhm.
hands-on thing that we were doing, and it was pretty simple. So we just did the Global Azure Boot Camp this past weekend,
Right.
and that was a it's been a long time since we've done the hands-on labs for our boot camps. We did one last year, but before that, it had almost all gone to just presentations and talks,
Hmm.
and almost like an Azure conference versus a boot camp. So we wanted to go back to the hands-on stuff. And this year we had 4 sessions, and each one of them had a hands-on piece to it. The first one was not coding. It was all GUI stuff. So I believe Veronica presented using a playground of sorts, interacting with
Mhm.
OpenAI. So they just had to do some stuff online on a browser. Where Bill, I host or I should say, the Boston Azure team now is Bill Wilder, myself, and Veronica,
Mhm.
and we all presented, and then another gentleman from Microsoft, Juan Pablo. We all presented a topic, and we all had a lab to it. And Bill's lab had to do some Python, and then that's when we could see we're going to start to have some problems. My stuff was in Python, and so was Juan Pablo's, but ours were in notebooks, and Bill was actually doing a GitHub uh, Copilot demo,
Mhm.
and he wanted them to be writing some actual code for his hands-on piece. So they needed to have Python installed, and that is when we noticed that we had posted the version of Python that we wanted, and Visual Studio Code plugins or extensions, and as is always the case, very few people paid attention to it. So we had people with all different versions of Python trying to do stuff that, and we were trying to troubleshoot, is it a Python issue? Is it some other issue? And yeah, we had at least a half a dozen different issues, and multiple people would have the same issue. But it was an interesting day, and it was good. They really liked the labs. I was a little overzealous with my labs, and they didn't quite get to finish them all. I had 5 labs, and I think they got to like the third one, and we were just running out of time. We had 2 hours, and I let I didn't wind my talk up fast enough because people were asking questions, and I was trying to cover the relevant stuff. Because again, so the talk that I gave is the same one that I'm giving to your group. It's a
Okay.
beginner level talk, so it's for those who have heard about Chat GPT, this AI stuff, and wondering how they're going to start using it in applications for business products. It's like, because I'm an independent consultant, and I work with a lot of small medium businesses. They don't have this R&D budget where they can say, oh yeah, well, we've got 250 grand, we'll just pay you to play around with some POCs for the year. Well, my customers don't do that. If they're not going to get business value out of it, they can't they can't waste their time on it. So I've really been trying to figure out where my customers can start to get value out of this big Gen AI movement that's out there. And everyone's saying, oh, well, if you don't start using Gen AI, then you're going to be the one that loses out. So you got to get in on it early. And so many, I mean, even small companies where the if they're big enough to have a board, then they're talking about AI and how their company should be using it. But
Right.
what it comes down to is no one really knows the best way to use it, and there's no one killer app for it. So it's kind of all over the place. And this RAG, and in my presentation, I used the term RAG so many times because it's just so much quicker and easier to say than retrieval augmented generation.
You're
And
right.
a lot of people know what a copilot is, and it's kind of the same idea, where
Yeah.
it's using another data set before it actually gets involved with an LLM on the other end. But this actually is a scenario where it's a just an implementation pattern that business can start to get business value out of things that start to introduce Gen AI into their business processes. So that's kind of how I got started with this topic. And with the boot camp, going back to the boot camp, my hands-on lab, took the transcripts from all of our YouTube videos. We have 40 YouTube videos out there.
Mhm.
Actually, I came up with 2 sets of transcripts. I did the 40 videos, and then when I was doing it hands-on on a hard wire at home on the internet, it took quite some time to chunk up the 40 transcripts and do all the embeddings and stuff. So I chopped it down to just 10 for the day, and I should have probably chopped it down to 5. So it would have been a little better on the Wi-Fi at the boot camp. But the whole goal was to use these transcripts and progressively get closer to where you could ask a question and it would give you information from one of the one of the 40 or one of the 10 videos that were in that set of transcripts that the
Right.
system was built on. So to me, it was a pretty interesting pet project to build out. It uses Python and this framework called LangChain. And
Right.
I'm
Familiar.
now working on the same labs, but using C sharp and semantic kernel. So I'm hoping to have those done in the next couple weeks. But yeah, I mean the labs are out there on my GitHub with the Python and LangChain ones. Pretty interesting stuff.
So, want to get back to that, but and hear some more about the talk and the rag and Lang Chang and everything. But first, I want to plug a couple of upcoming events. The first one is going to be KCDC 2024. As the name implies, this is going to be in Kansas City, Missouri, from June 26th to June 28th. Tickets are available now. I believe. I believe they have an if the early bird price may still be available. I don't know, but if you go to kcdc.info, this is a gigantic conference. Close to 2,000 people attend that, or at least before the shutdowns. I haven't been there since this is gonna be the first time I've been there since the shutdown. So, but I know they used to get close to 2,000 people there. And then also about a month and a half later, also in Missouri, there's a lot of conferences in Missouri coming up. Is going to be DevUp, and that's going to be August 14th through 16th. If you go to devupcomp.org, you can tickets are also available then. This is kind of this one. If you want to, uh, I don't want to say it's a party conference. That sounds that kind of sounds like but no, this one because it is right across the street from the Ameristar Casino Resort in
Mm.
St. Charles. But why don't So I know that throwing around this term RAG and then Lang chain and
Yeah.
uh, LLMs and all this. Maybe you could differentiate between kind of define and differentiate between the three.
Sure. So the easy one to take out of that is the LangChain. LangChain
Mhm,
is a framework that helps you work with the other two. So the RAG pattern, so it's an implementation pattern. What it is it's basically two parts. It's retrieval and then generation. And then you're augmenting the generation with the retrieval. And what that means, the typical example that Microsoft gives is a system where you have your health benefits document. So it's an HR system, and you want to search, uh, is pet insurance covered in my benefits?
mhm,
And it goes out, or it goes out. It's an application that will then search all through all the PDFs or everything that's in the system to come back with a nice English explanation of whether it is, if it is, what's it covered under, and all that. So it comes back with a clean English um, explanation. So the two parts of that is the retrieval from the data from the system. That's the retrieval part. And there's a few common pieces of the puzzle that people use when they're talking about RAG, and that's embeddings and vectors. They're kind of used interchangeably. That's mainly for semantic search. It's not necessary. You don't have to use those for retrieval. The usage of semantic search just makes it so much more powerful. And the example I'll show most likely in the talk is I have a demo. It's my demos all in C sharp, Blazor. The first one I show is use a SQL Server on the back end. So nothing special, nothing that most application developers using C sharp haven't
mhm,
used. So I have it's I've got vectors, I've got it's a chopped up PDF document. I forget it's like 30 pages of this PDF document about an ultra race out in Arizona. It's like a 240-mile race, so if you're racing one of those, you might have some questions, especially like, are there restrooms? Where
mhm,
are the restrooms? How often are they? Stuff like that. So if I ask the question to the system, are there restrooms? It'll come back, and then I show an example. It's like, if you could do that in SQL Server too. So I have the contents of each of the pages in SQL Server, so I can do a full text search. Are there restrooms or restroom in the text of any of the article detail? And it'll come back with the three rows that restroom or restrooms exists, and that's retrieval. That's the simplest retrieval you can do. However, the vector and embeddings come into play because in a way where I can ask, are there washrooms? And it'll still come back with those, because semantically washroom is very similar to
right.
restroom. So things like that. And Bill Wilder, after my presentation on Saturday, actually asked, well, what if I ask it in French? What would it come back with? And it came back with the right answer, which is odd. I mean, not all embeddings are effective in multiple languages,
Mhm,
but oddly enough, I guess French and English are similar enough that they did come back. The similarities scores weren't quite as high in the French search, but it did come back, which is really amazing. I mean, that is the power of embeddings in
Mhm.
vectors. Um, and why people are using those with the retrieval piece versus just a search. Because I mean, you could do retrieval with a SQL Server search with like and have a decent system. It's just as soon as your users take it a little off the rails and use words that that you don't have in the actual text, it's not quite as effective. So most people use embeddings in their retrieval side. So you do these search, so like to say take the embeddings out of the picture, you do the like clause and you come back with 3 rows of where restrooms are in this PDF file. Then you take, I forget, I believe the chunks are pages. So I'm sending basically 3 chunks of information along with this prompt to the LLM that's saying it's got some instruction in there that I honestly forget what the full prompt is right now, but it's basically some instructions to the LLM saying that you're providing information about ultra race information. Here are the relevant pieces of information. If you can't answer the question from this, don't answer it. And some stuff like that. And then the question that I asked, are there restrooms? And you pass all that off to the LLM, and the LLM comes back with this nice English explanation of what it reasoned over that context that I gave it from those documents. And it it works great. I mean, it's so much better than any of those chat bots that you used to see online. Or sometimes I go to a site and I try to actually interact with the chat box, and they're terrible. It's like
Yeah.
they need a little work on that. They need to test it out a little bit first. But so that's really what it is. It's just this retrieval stuff that you do ahead of time to get only the relevant stuff along with the user's question and some instructions so that you can give that to an LLM to get a nice English response back. Or it'll come back and say it doesn't know or ask you follow-up questions. You can also get citations. So if you use Copilot on the phone, I don't know if you use that. It's a free
Mhm.
app. It's a Microsoft Copilot. If you use it, it's like a RAG type system. It'll come back with a citation. So you ask it a question like, I have ground turkey, green peppers, and onions in my refrigerator. What can I cook with that? It'll go out, come back, and it'll give me an explanation, but then it'll give me some citations
Right.
that'll be links to where it got that information. So that's the same idea with most RAG systems. Or it'll come back with a link so that you can find that PDF that it used the information to create your answer. So citations are important. And another common thing is follow-up questions. So
Mhm.
some of the demos that Microsoft has out there, and they've got several of them. They've got at least a half dozen that I know about. There's probably at least a dozen of GitHub repos out there, several different languages. I mean, Java, C Sharp, TypeScript slash JavaScript, Python. Most of them are in Python.
Right.
Several are in C Sharp, but there's definitely a mix. So yeah, it's I don't know if that answers your question, or not, but the language model is really
Yeah.
only used to give it some context, and it comes
Mhm.
back with a nice explanation for you.
So is it sort of like, I don't wanna say traditional, but sort of like the machine learning concept of transfer learning?
I don't know. Honestly, that's actually one of the questions. So one of the questions I ask when I give the talk are there any ML experts or data scientists here? Because I want to see if I'm going to make anybody sick when I give my explanation of everything. Because I'm coming at it from a web developer's
Right.
standpoint more than us. I'm a full stack developer. I've been doing business applications for more than 20 years. So
Right.
SQL Server, web apps, all of that stuff I know top to bottom. When it
Mhm.
comes to machine learning, I know a little bit.
Mm.
When it comes to AI, I know a little bit, but I honestly don't know. And when it comes to working with Azure OpenAI, it's another API call, really. I mean,
Right.
it's relatively easy. It's just you need to know everything is really prompt engineering. The whole RAG
Mhm.
thing is prompt
Yeah,
engineering
yeah,
because
yeah.
you're giving it some homework and a decent explanation what you want for it to be useful. But yeah, I, I don't know if it's close to what you're asking or not, but
Yeah,
I guess I mean if you've used Chat GPT, it's basically Chat GPT, but it knows about your stuff. And
right.
that's the retrieval part. It don't only knows what you give it when you give the context, but
Right, and I think what you're talking about here, I think you brought up an important point, is it saying that you are a business, you've been, for many years a business apps developer, but now you've been able to begin to transition into, because of course, this is like, there what's the famous Microsoft memo from the 90s about, the internet is big, we're going to put the internet in all of our products. AI is sort of taking the same thing, and what a good job Microsoft has done with the Azure AI services in making that accessible to everyone. You don't have to know diddly squat about AI. You just know how to you just know how to make a REST call, or if you're using a language for which an SDK exists, you don't all you need to have to know is the language. So
yeah.
yeah, they've done a really good job of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so the whole argument that people use that, well, it's machine learning, it's an LLM. You need to learn Python. No, you really
No, you
don't.
don't.
You
Mm-mm.
can. There's a lot of libraries that will do you a lot of good if you need to do data manipulation in Python.
Mhm.
Where C sharp, you got to work a lot more. So there are really a lot of strengths when it comes to the stuff that Python provides, but you don't need it if you're trying to work this into a business application. You don't have to. You can use C sharp if your web app is already in C sharp. There's a lot of really cool stuff out there. Like I was playing around quite a bit with semantic kernel today. Um, one of the so I'm still learning semantic kernel, as in using it. Actually, same thing with LangChains. Like I'm working on some of my own stuff, and I've got a proposal out there for actual business work with this stuff.
Mhm.
But I mean, today I was playing around with the code for a blog that I'm writing, part three of a Hello World for plugins of
Mhm.
semantic kernel. And it starts out, so part one was more or less creating a plugin to ask for asking ChatGPT and for a interesting fact for today's date. And then you had to give it today's dates because ChatGPT doesn't know what day it is. It just doesn't. It'll give you a historical fact on April 24th or 25th or whatever date that you give it. It'll has plenty of knowledge because it's been trained on so much information. It can come back with information about that date, but it doesn't know what today's date is. It's not that type of a system. So when the part one is creating a plugin so that you extract the date from it, but then right before you ask it, it plugs it in the code. But today I'm working on part three, and what it does is it's a function because so OpenAI has function calling or tools, it's sometimes called, which means you have OpenAI call back. So I create two functions. One of them is, and the descriptions are very important because that's OpenAI is going to determine what it needs to do by what you specify. So one of the function names, the name's not important, but the description on it is gets current date, and then the next one is gets historic fact for date. So I ask the question, give me a historic fact for today's date. And it goes to OpenAI. OpenAI says, oh, well, we need to get today's date. So it comes back saying it needs to call the function to get today's date. So it calls my local function to get today's date, goes back to OpenAI, and then it says, okay, we need to get the historic fact. So now that we have today's date and the historic fact API has a required today parameter on it, so it knows to pass that to that API. So it comes back and says, okay, you need to call this API with this parameter. And then my code returns the result to OpenAI. And then it puts together the historic fact for today's date. So it does all this behind the scenes. It's not super fast because I mean it makes at least 3 or 4 calls,
Right.
but it uh, out, out of seeing the descriptions of the functions that I say I can do, and the prompt or the question that I give it, if it doesn't know that it can do what I ask it, because as soon as it sees that I'm asking for today's date, it knows it can't do it. So then it looks at what I can do and what the requirements are, and it comes back and calls my stuff. I mean, that's starting to get really powerful. It
Yeah.
is wonky if you change the model or version out. So I was playing with it on the wrong model this morning, and it was coming back with Python code to calculate what today's date is. I'm like, no, I don't want you to calculate. I don't want you to write the code for me. I've got the code. I told you what the code is. So there are certain things that you do have to work out. And so what that means is if the model changes, if a new version comes out, your stuff may completely break
Right.
because it's not deterministic. It's not if X equals Y, then Z. It's, it's machine learning and it's all based on data. And as soon as you change that model that it was based on, you've got to verify that everything works for you.
Right. Well, that's I don't want you to give too much of the talk away. So we
Yeah,
said
yeah, yeah. Sorry.
if you're gonna make the trip to Memphis, we want people to come to
Yeah,
see you.
yeah.
So we'll go ahead and start to wrap it up with that. The again the talk it's been scrolling down at the bottom the entire time here. So if you'll go to bit.ly memazug 0524, you can RSVP if you're local to Memphis. Come out and see us. It's a week from tomorrow, so Thursday, May 2nd. And if you're outside of the Memphis area, there will be a Teams link posted to the meetup page very soon. Jason, any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
No, no, I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to another
Yeah.
in-person event.
Looking forward to having you. So, thanks for watching, everyone. We will see you next week, and looking forward to seeing everybody.
Awesome. Thanks.